Ellie, do you think we're ready to go?
I think so. I think we can go ahead and at least I think we'll probably have people joining over the next couple minutes, but I think we can go ahead and get started. It's 2 o'clock.
Great, thanks.
Um,
Hello, everybody. My name's Andy Loftus. I'm a contractor with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, specifically on this effort to look at the small mesh exemption program for summer flounder and the fly net exemption program for summer flounder. Um, Kylie, if you can pull up the presentation, we can start popping through it real quick. Next slide. The purpose of this meeting is to address three issues related to summer flounder management. The commercial minimum mesh sizes, and Hannah and Kylie will address that. The small mesh exemption program that's been going on for a little over 30 years now, and I will focus in on that. And then the fly net exemption program, and I will also focus in on that. We recognize there are a lot of other issues that people might have with summer flounder management that they might want to see changed and things like that. But we aren't going to be addressing those today. This webinar is focused in on getting feedback on these three specific aspects of summer flounder management. So keep that in mind as you're making comments and asking questions and as we go through the webinar. Kylie, next slide. So the meeting outline, you saw as you signed in a quick agenda. This is basically what the agenda is. We're going to first of all start off addressing the commercial minimum mesh size discussion and input. And then we will move on to the small mesh exemption, the fly net exemption, and then general questions and answers. In general, we'll have about 15 minutes of presentation for each of these three items, just to kind of provide the baseline information. And then we'll have approximately 35 minutes of discussion and feedback from you all on these specific issues. And at the very end, we'll have just a 15-20 minute time period for general questions and answers that you might not have had time to ask, or something that we hadn't expected or anything. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Kylie and Hannah talking about what the next steps are for this evaluation. Next slide. So the procedures to have a smooth meeting, please hold your questions until after each presentation. As I said, each one will be no more than 15 minutes. So please hold your questions until those are done. If you're making a comment or a question, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand feature of the WebEx, and state your name and affiliation when you're making the comments. And it's important to note that we are going to do a couple of things after the webinar. Number one, written comments will be accepted until November 17th. And there's a link at the bottom here. And recognizing that you probably can't jot that down real quickly, you can go to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council website, mafmc.org, and you can locate the form to submit your comments on that website. And then lastly, I think at the end, there'll be emails that you can email Hannah or Kylie or myself if you have any comments and you can't locate the form, or it's easier or something like that. We will be accepting them that way. And then we will also probably do some follow-up with some of you after this webinar. I'm sure we'll have follow-up questions and things like that we'll want to get answered. So Kylie, next slide. So before we launch into the minimum mesh size discussion by Kylie and Hannah, is there any general questions that anybody has right off the bat that you want to ask about this webinar? I don't see any hands. So Kylie, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Andy. So just another kind of general comment before I get into the presentation. It's there is on the Mid-Atlantic Council's website, there's a calendar event for this webinar where you can find some of the background information about why we're holding this, as well as background. There's a background document that just sort of briefly explains what we're looking at with each issue and the questions that we're going to be walking through on the webinar today. And also these slides that we're covering have been posted as well as the link to that Google form that Andy mentioned.
And
So,
Kylie,
yep.
I should also mention this is being recorded.
Oh, yes. Also, yep, being recorded. And also, yeah, all of us are happy to have further discussions about this after the webinar. If you have follow-up thoughts, questions, prefer to give your comments, not on a recorded webinar, we're happy to take questions and comments by phone or email as well. So my name is Kylie Dancy. For those that don't know me, I'm Mid-Atlantic Council staff, and I have the lead on Summer Flounder, and I've been working with Hannah Hart on our staff on an evaluation of the commercial minimum mesh size for Summer Flounder. So I just have a few slides on the background for this issue. For Summer Flounder trawl gear, there are currently two options for the minimum mesh size, and that includes a 5.5-inch diamond mesh or a 6-inch square. Those mesh regulations have been in place since Amendment 2 in 1993. At that time, those regulations were put in place based on some trawl selectivity surveys at the time. There was limited information about the square mesh selectivity for summer flounder, beyond recognizing that the square mesh equivalent to the diamond mesh should be larger than whatever was adopted for the diamond mesh. And so there was some mesh selectivity information out there at the time for cod and haddock and pollock, showing that for round fish, 5.5-inch diamond would be roughly the same selectivity as a 5-inch square. But this was understood to not necessarily hold true for flatfish. So in thinking about what to designate as the square mesh size, the managers looked at a couple different sources of information, and that included information from Amendment 4 to the Northeast Multi-Species FMP, indicating that a 5.5-inch square mesh would be roughly equivalent to a 5-inch diamond. And secondly, a selectivity study for winter flounder, indicating that the diamond mesh selected for slightly larger fish, the diamond mesh would select for slightly larger fish than the equivalent square mesh in the size there. And then the third source of information was a square mesh experiment in Canada, which noted that for flounder, the diamond mesh cod ends always had about 50% higher retention lengths and selection factors. So there was some sort of limited information on which to base this 6-inch square mesh regulation. But again, it was deemed to be, it's thought at the time to be the most equivalent to the 5.5-inch diamond. And just as a reminder, these mesh regulations apply to trawl vessels that if you are retaining more than the seasonal possession thresholds for summer flounder, which is 100 pounds in the summer, May through October, or 200 pounds in the winter, November through April. So the council funded a mesh size study several years back, led by Emerson Hasbrook and his team at Cornell. And the results of this study indicated that the 5.5-inch diamond and 6-inch square may not be that equivalent in terms of selectivity for summer flounder. And it looked like, based on the results that I'll show a little bit more in the next slide, that the 6-inch square appears to function closer to a 5-inch diamond mesh in terms of selectivity. So the Summer Flounder Scott Black Sea Bass Monitoring Committee had previously flagged this to the Council and the Atlantic States Commission's Summer Flounder Board, that they flagged concerns that there was higher catch of undersized summer flounder with this 6-inch square mesh based on the results of this study. And so based on that monitoring committee discussion and recommendations, the Council and the Commission's Summer Flounder Scott and Black Sea Bass Board are seeking feedback on how square mesh sizes are used and whether there is a need for a possible modification or phase out of this option. So this is just a quick visual of the results from that study, comparing selectivity curves for a couple different mesh size options that were tested. with the horizontal axis in this figure shows the length of summer flounder in centimeters, and then the vertical axis shows the probability of retention. The vertical red line here is the commercial minimum fish size of 14 inches. And so the two current mesh size regulations are the ones that are highlighted in yellow here. So left of the commercial minimum fish size line, you see the 5-inch diamond and 6-inch square curves are pretty similar, with the length at 50% retention for those two mesh configurations basically extremely similar there. So both the 5-inch diamond and the 6-inch square are retaining about 50% of summer flounder that are just below the minimum fish size. And then to the right of the minimum size line, you see the 5.5-inch diamond curve shows a pretty different selectivity pattern compared to the 6-inch square, while both of those are the current regulations. And then the 6-inch diamond, not surprisingly, retains more larger fish compared to the other tested options. So that this study did not include another, I don't think it included another square mesh option that was tested. So it was just the 6-inch square and then a couple different configurations of diamond mesh. So we've tried to start looking into some characterization of the use of square mesh, with more to come, but just kind of quickly what we've seen from our brief observer data analysis is that looking at observer data from 2000 to 2022 using looking at observed trawl gear hauls where summer flounder was identified as the primary target species. Trawl gear targeting summer flounder is using about 68% of hauls were using diamond mesh compared to about 31% using square mesh. And then looking at the same observer set, we also looked at the measured mesh size in the observer data, the distribution of that among the hauls that were using square mesh. And we see that many of them fall within the 6-inch and larger category, but there are also quite a few hauls in that 5 to 6-inch square mesh category that are smaller than the legal requirement. And so some of these might be utilizing the small mesh exemption program, as we'll discuss later, but we didn't yet attempt to filter out those trips. So we're not sure. It's also possible that there's some non-compliance occurring or some mesh sizes that are actually being used that are to target summer flounder that are smaller than the minimum required. We do expect some additional analysis like this to try to look at different patterns that we might see by area and things like that in preparation for our monitoring committee meeting in about 2 weeks. So there's more to come, but we're just starting to kind of look at observer data, but we also wanted to get some feedback from you all today to provide a little bit more direction on what we should be looking at here, as well as your perspectives on the current mesh sizes, whether you think changes are needed. We're trying to get a better sense of to what extent the 6-inch square versus 5.5-inch diamond, or really any configuration is used, what factors are influencing the choice of mesh that you choose to buy or to use. Are there certain circumstances where square mesh is preferred, such as, targeting other species, other FMPs, different use by region, other driving factors? Are there differences in cost or ease of acquiring these different net types? Is a square mesh regulation still needed for summer flounder is what we're trying to answer. It seems like based on the observer data, there is still, substantial use of it in targeting summer flounder, but we're looking for perspectives on if it were modified, what square mesh might be closer in selectivity to 5.5-inch diamond, if there's any thoughts on that. And then should it maybe be phased out, or should it be modified? If it were to be phased out, how long would an appropriate phase out period be? So I think that is pretty much all these questions. Oh, if the regulations are modified, what is a kind of a range of costs that might be anticipated for replacing nets, and how can we phase any changes in to minimize those costs? So I think that's a summary of the questions that we're asking today, and that is all I have for the presentation. So I'm happy to start by taking any questions, preferably if there are any questions to start, and then happy to take any comments, any perspectives from anyone with any insight on these mesh size issues. So go ahead and please raise your hand if you, let's start with questions. Chris Bat-Savage.
Hey, thanks for the presentation, Kylie. You mentioned you looked at the observer data for the use of square mesh for trips targeting Flounder. Are you able to also look at VTR data? I can't remember if VTR data gives information on whether square mesh is used or if they just give the mesh size. I don't know if that was another option for looking at square mesh usage.
I think we talked about that, and off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it does not give the information about square versus diamond or the specific configuration of the mesh. Hannah, I don't know if you remember, but I think that's why we haven't looked at VTR for this question specifically. Go ahead, Hannah.
That's what I recall as well. I can do a quick search just to make sure though.
Other questions? James Fletcher? James, you are on mute. Okay, I think you're off mute now. Go ahead. I'm not hearing anything from you, James. I know we had this working earlier, so I'm sure we can figure this out. I'm not hearing anything from you currently. It does look like you are, okay, now you're muted again. And now you're unmuted. I think there just must be a double mute situation if you're muted on your end. Let's see if there are any other questions, and then we can try again in a minute. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I think we could move into comments as well. James, do you want to try again? I'm definitely hearing some kind of sound, I think, from you, James, but I don't hear words right now. Are there others who would like to make a comment on this issue? Gus Lovegood?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yes. So my only comments I would like to say, if you're suggesting, a phasing out of the square mesh 6-inch cot end, I think your graph should show a retention probability for a 6.5-inch square mesh as well. And my comment as to, and I'm going to say this, I'm sorry, my affiliation is I'm the owner and operator of the fishing vessel Lily Rose, and I speak on behalf of all the members of the Fishermen's Dock Cooperative in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. When you talk about what this could cost, if you're just changing the cod ends of the net, you're talking thousands of dollars. Potentially tens of thousands of dollars. But if you're talking about rebuilding and changing nets altogether, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. a single net these days can be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000. So that's something to keep in mind. This really wasn't the most important thing I wanted to comment on today, so I'm going to open her back up for anyone else who wants to say anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Gus. That's helpful. James, do you want to try again? All right. Not
You
hearing
also have
anything
Megan.
about-
You also have Megan.
Yeah, let's go to Megan.
Thanks, Kylie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, on this issue, I think it's been something that's been in place for a very long time. The Fluke resource has rebuilt under this regulation. And, I did, in preparation for this meeting, I did talk to the three primary net builders in the Southern New England region. And they've told me that they do build brand new 6-inch square cot ends for people for this fishery. So, I think it's important that the council keep in mind people, this year, last year, things like that have shelled out money for 6-inch square cot ends. And if this is something that the council is going to want to change, phasing stuff out and not making those investments, immediately worthless is something that should be thought about, and not to be adversarial in any way, but, if this is something that the monitoring committee has been concerned about, we've also seen in the past, like 5 years, the monitoring committee being okay with exceeding the RHL. So if we're talking about, stock conservation and things, I don't think that this is a primary issue on folks' radar that needs to really be looked at. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Other comments? Not seeing any other hands raised right now. Emerson Hasbert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Kylie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hold on, I'm getting some feedback on my end. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, thank you for your presentation as well. I just want to point out though that the L50 for the 6-inch square mesh is about 1 centimeter below what the minimum size is. So we're talking about 4/10 of an inch smaller than the legal minimum size used in the 6-inch square mesh. And then also, I don't want to digress today, but I would just ask the monitoring committee to take a look at, there's a table in our report that shows the various statistics for the data analysis for these different mesh selectivities. And there's a p-value in that table. And that p-value determines the significance of the model fit. And for the 6-inch square, that p-value was 0.06. We're looking at an alpha of 0.05. So it's just barely significant. And for all the other mesh sizes for summer flounder as well as the other species, the p-value results were highly significant, much less than 0.05. So I just want to point that out and point that out to the monitoring committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Emerson. James Fletcher, we'll try again. I'm still hearing a little bit of noise from your line when you're unmuted, James, but not hearing anything else. And I am not seeing any other hands raised. So I guess just coming back to the questions a little bit, is there anyone that can provide any perspective on kind of what the decision would be between using square or diamond? Is it just personal preference? I think we had heard, you know, the square might have been originally put in place because that was the regulation for groundfish at the time. Is there other considerations that lead to choosing one versus the other, or is it just personal preference and availability? Okay, not seeing any other comments or hands. We can move on to the next issue. I just want to make sure that we're giving enough time for folks to comment on this who want to comment. And I know, James, you're still having audio issues. We can certainly come back to this issue if we get those resolved. Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment or share any perspective on this? All right, James Fletcher. Sorry, I'm still not hearing anything. I think we can try to have someone give you a call and figure out what's happening here. The audio issues. In the meantime, seeing no other hands or thoughts on this issue, Andy, do you want to move into the next topic?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the next topic is the small mesh exemption program. Next slide, Kylie. So history of this, it goes back to 1993 Amendment 2 to the management plan. And it is, in a nutshell, vessels fishing east of longitude 72 degrees 30 west from November 1st to April 30th and using mesh sizes smaller than 5.5-inch diamond or 6-inch square may land more than 200 pounds of summer flounder. Next slide. This is a map, a graphical representation of the line. Next slide. Administratively, the participation in the program requires a letter of authorization from GARFO and participation in the program for at least 7 days. Vessels who are enrolled in the program cannot fish west of the line while they are participating in it. GARFO may rescind the permits if the vessels fishing under this program are discarding more than 10% of their summer flounder catch. Next slide. So utilization, approximately 75 letters of authorization, LOAs, are issued each year. Actually, over the last 10 years, that's varied from between around 55 to 75. An average of 68 permits are issued each year, but in the last year it was 75. And most of those permits that are issued, the vessels are actively landing summer flounder according to the landings reports. Approximately 6% of the observer trips met the criteria for fishing area. In other words, fishing east of the line with small mesh, greater than 200 pounds of summer flounder landed, and discards. Again, that varies over the last 10 years. I think it has been around range from between 4% to 6% or thereabouts, but it doesn't vary too much. So we approximately 6% of the observed trips have met that criteria. So it's well under the 10% threshold level that is in regulation for rescinding the program. The number of vessels participating, that being the 75, and the percent of trips observed meeting the criteria, that being 6%, have remained relatively stable. So we're not seeing large fluctuations up and down. Next slide. So what we're asking for today for feedback from the webinar participants are the perspectives on the current use of the small mesh exemption program. And as an idea of what we're kind of looking for, how are vessels utilizing exemption and in what fisheries? Has the exemption program changed over the time in terms of target species, discard rates, timing, frequency of trips, etc.? Are the current regulations still serving the original intent of reducing summer flounder discards in small mesh fisheries that are targeting other species within this time frame and area? And are there any recommendations on the exemption program? Is there any need to change it? Or is this exemption or the requirements of participation needing to be changed, or any other aspects that you think need to be addressed with this program? So with that, I will open it up for questions or comments, either one. I don't see. Okay, Megan?
So this program is very, very important to vessels in the southern New England region. A lot of boats, for example, out of Point Judith, have this exemption, and they do use it. I think it's a good program. It reduces discards. And I think that the one change that I would recommend would be to move the line west, because at this time of year, it is in the wintertime. Most vessels are fishing along the edge of the continental shelf at that time. That's where, you know, all the fish are migrating at that time of year. And I think being allowed to use this exemption to the west along the edge in the wintertime would be beneficial, because currently, like you pointed out, if a boat leaves the dock, it has to stay east of the line. So now if it's, you know, not finding its target species east of the line, but it wants to go west to look for it, it has to return to port and go back the other way. So, you know, allowing flexibility is important, especially at $4 a gallon diesel. And, you know, it does serve to reduce discards. The program does do that. And I think that, you know, minimizing discards and maximizing, you know, profitability in fisheries is important. And I would support moving the line west. Thank you.
Megan, I just want to ask a follow-up question with you. So if I was looking back at some of the history of this, and the line, you know, was established because mainly the larger flounder were being caught east of the line. If the line were to be moved west, do you think there'd be a greater number of discards? Any thoughts on that?
No, I don't think so, because the program actually reduces discards, right? You can keep it instead of having to throw it over. Currently, you have to just throw it over.
Yeah, I meant smaller fish, actually.
Smaller fish. I don't think that is going to, I don't think that that's going to affect that at all.
Okay. Thank you. Eric?
Yep.
Thank you. You hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So I'm going to follow up on Ms. Lapp's comments. I do agree that that line should be moved to the west. There's no reason that with the gear these guys are using now in the squid fishery, I mean, the meshes are 5 feet long, 8 feet long, 10 feet long in the wings, and the bellies are greater than 8 inches as well. And that's another topic for discussion. But my suggestion would be to redefine the area by moving the line west. And I'll give you my coordinates would be to, right now, the beginning of that line is either in Connecticut or on the south shore of Long Island at 7230. What I'd like to see is moving that line to the west about 5 miles to 7237 on the beach, and then dropping it due south to 7237 and 3920, which intersects with the northeast corner of the SCUP GRA, and then following the eastern border of the SCUP GRA all the way down to 37 degrees north. That gives the reason that SCUP line was moved west several years ago was to give the squid fleet access to the bank. And with the gear they're towing in that fishery, fluke is really only a bycatch. I don't see that there'll be a lot of increased discards in that fishery, and I don't think you're going to catch a lot of small fish. But with that line moved to the west to those coordinates, I think it would actually reflect the reality of what goes on there in the squid fishery especially. And quite frankly, to get that, you know, like Megan said, if you need an exemption, you either have to go home to get it or you have to get it before you leave, and then you're locked in for 7 days. It's a tremendous inconvenience. Nobody should have to, it's hard enough to go fishing now, and, you know, fuel is expensive, the price of fish is expensive. There's enough aggravation in the wheelhouse of any fishing boat right now that you should reflect reality. And of course, the Paperwork Reduction Act itself would say that you shouldn't need a piece of paper to do what you're doing already. So that would be my suggestion, to move that line west to make it look like the coordinates I just gave you. So I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but I think that that would be a huge benefit to the industry, and it would make things just so much easier and not upset the fluke fishery at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Megan?
Yeah, thanks. To follow up on that, I do agree with Eric. I think that that would be a good line to follow. It would, you know, allow the access to the edge, which is where the smallmouth fisheries are happening at that time of year. And I think I just did want to point out something that he mentioned, which I'm not sure if most council members are aware of, but, you know, in the wintertime, most of the boats, you know, that are, say, squid fishing on that edge, they have 10-foot mesh in the wings. Like, you're not catching fluke. You're not targeting fluke, I should say. You're definitely not targeting fluke with 10-foot mesh in the wings. Flatfish fall out of there. And, you know, that's the reason why nets with 10-foot mesh in the wings are used as regulation in certain groundfish regulations to the east, because groundfish boats are allowed to go catch things like haddock, but they're not going to catch flatfish, which are a choke species in that area under the groundfish FMP, so there's requirements. You know, allowing boats that are using that type of gear, you know, to catch squid, et cetera, on the edge in the wintertime, like, you're not targeting fluke with this gear. If you happen somehow to catch fluke with this gear, there's a lot of fluke, because this gear is actually designed to shed flatfish and designed to shed other non-target species. So you're not going to do damage to the resource with large mesh in the front end of the nets, which are what are being used at this time. And I wholeheartedly support Eric's suggestion on those lines. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Any other comments or thoughts or questions? Not seeing any hands. Oh, James, can we try again? Not hearing you, James.
Jim, if you're on your phone, can you click *6 to unmute yourself?
No, we're not hearing you, James, if you're trying. We'll go on to Bonnie Brady. Bonnie, we're not hearing you.
How about
Bonnie?
now? Can
There
you
you
hear
go.
me?
Yep.
I knew eventually it would work. Yeah, sorry about the background noise. I'm just not speaking on my behalf, but I'm speaking on behalf of Dave Arapach, the owner operator of the Caitlin Parade out of Montauk, New York. And he said to tell you all, because he can't figure out how to unmute the phone, that he is good with everything that Eric Reed had mentioned before and that he supports that.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions from folks? So,
Can you all try unmuting Fletcher from your end?
So Jason, I just unmuted his computer.
okay, we'll go on. Gus Lovegren.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there and say, you know, I could wholeheartedly agree with what I believe Eric and Megan both said. They said it best. I got nothing to add to it, but yeah, you can move that line to the west. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts? Anna, you still working with James?
Yeah, I'm gonna give him a call back and see if we can figure something else out.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments about the program? So what I'm hearing is moving the line is the biggest issue that people have with the small mesh exemption program. Everything else working okay with it? Okay. I guess we'll go ahead and move on then to the Flynet program. If there are no more comments, that oh, any more comments. So, and if we can get the audio problems worked out with James, we'll come back to comments he might have about either of the two topics we've already gone through. So Flynet exemption, Kylie, next slide, please. So similar to the small mesh exemption program, the Flynet exemption dates back to 1993 to Amendment 2. And basically this is any vessel fishing with a 2-seam otter trawl Flynet specifically defined, and I'll cover that in a minute, are exempt from the summer flounder minimum mesh size requirements. And that definition, next slide, Kylie. That definition of a Flynet, I'll leave this up here for a second as I read through it. And this is in the regulation, a 2-seam otter trawl with the following configuration. The net has a large mesh webbing in the wings with a stretch mesh measure of 8 to 64 inches. The first body or belly section of the net consists of 35 meshes or more of 8-inch stretch mesh webbing or larger. And then in the body section of the net, the stretch mesh decreases in size relative to the wings and continues to decrease throughout the extensions to the cod end, which generally has a webbing of 2 inches stretch mesh. So that's the official definition of what a fly net is in the regulations as it applies to the fly net exemption program. Next slide, please. So the purpose originally of the exemption was to accommodate the fly net fisheries targeting other species, but catching very limited amounts of summer flounder, particularly Delaware to North Carolina, and even more particularly focusing in on the North Carolina fisheries for croaker, weakfish, like mackerel, bluefish, etc. We go back to the literature, go back to the Amendment 2, and we look at the discussion and the questions in the Federal Register, and that's what the fly net exemption was originally intended to be addressing. Next slide. Administratively, the regional administrator may withdraw the exemption if the annual average summer flounder catch in the fly net fishery exceeds 1% of the total fly net catch. Next slide. So how is it being utilized? Again, with the original purpose being focused in on North Carolina, the landings in the North Carolina fly net fishery have declined over time. There have been little or no summer flounder landed in the fishery in recent years. North Carolina certifies that every year with a letter, I think, to the monitoring committee. In the 16 years since 2007, 325 observer trips recorded fly net, with less than 5 of the trips observed in each of the last 3 years. And so that's just the trips that were recorded as fly net. There have been comments from industry in the past that have suggested that the fly net exemption is being used to fish with high-rise nets that may not meet the exact regulatory definition in states other than North Carolina. Next slide. So the feedback we're looking for, what does industry consider a fly net for the purposes of fishing under this exemption? Regulatory definition is a 2-seam, but is it fly nets being considered also 4-seam by industry? Is the fly net exemption more widely used than what we're seeing in the observer data? What areas and for which target species does this exemption, or is this exemption being used? To what extent is industry using a 4-seam high-rise otter trawl under this exemption program? And what's the difference between a fly net and a high-rise otter net or otter trawl in terms of net handling characteristics, fishing efficiency, etc.? And then what are any recommendations that you may have on the fly net exemption, or is there a need to modify it or change this exemption? So that's the kind of the nutshell feedback we're looking for. Anything else that you might want to add in there? So I'll open it up for questions or comments. Let's see, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the definition has to change. The gear has changed. It has to be at least a 2-seam net. 4-seam nets are really common. And actually the mesh size at 8 to 64 inches doesn't cut it anymore because, like in the last conversation we had, you've got gear that has 10-foot meshes and essentially they would not qualify under the definition. So I would suggest changing it from a 2-seam net to 2-seam or 4-seam, or maybe make it even easier because there is high-tech gear that's being developed now that has 6 or 8 seams. So at least 2 seams. I know it sounds bizarre, but at least 2 seams, and greater than 8-inch mesh, not 8-inch to 64-inch. And I think that would probably cover it. As far as the difference between a fly net and a high-rise net, I don't think there's any difference. I just think it's a colloquialism, whatever that word is, up and down the coast. And as far as the net handling characteristics, I mean, they handle the same. The big seam nets, they're much more fuel efficient, which at $4 a gallon or more certainly helps the bottom line. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Gus?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with what Eric said. I mean, I have a handwritten definition right here, and it's just a net with at least 8-inch twine, whether it be 2-seam, 4-seam, 8-seam, 10-seam, endless seams in the wings, at least 35 meshes in the body section. It can graduate down to 2-inch twine. More importantly than anything else, for us, as myself, as the owner operator of the fishing vessel Lily Rose, and for all the members on behalf of the Fisherman's Dock Co-op, this exemption saves our asses consistently offshore. Because if we start out with fluke and we tear up a net, we're basically told without this exemption, we would have to go home and start a new trip. This exemption allows us to switch fisheries between fisheries. We can go from fluke to we could focus on fluke. We could switch over to porgies, black sea bass, squid. We're not locked into one thing. Whereas, without this, we would have to start small mesh and go big. And at that point, we couldn't go back. So, this allows us to, and we have certain fisheries where we catch one at night and we don't catch the other at night, and we switch back and forth between day and light and what we're doing. This exemption allows us to save fuel, save time, spend more time with our families, and focus on other things. We would be hurting real bad if this was taken away, and we really can't afford to lose anything at this point in time. You've heard our sob stories coming out of the wheelhouse, but it's no lie. So, I would like to see a better definition of the word for the fly net exemption. I would like to see more knowledge of it, because we've dealt with issues being boarded by the Coast Guard who have never heard of the fly net exemption. And we've had issues where I think citations were written but never really followed through on because nobody knew the rules. So, yeah, and I'm going to tell you right now that it doesn't matter how many seams you have, it's not really going to affect whether or not you're going to catch more or less fluke. So, again, please leave this one alone. Maybe give it a better definition of what a fly net is. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gus. Any other thoughts? Let's go. James, can we get you again? You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you, James. You're muted again. Okay, you're unmuted. Oh, not hearing you. Okay, any other thoughts, questions about the fly net exemption? Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Emerson.
Thank you, Andy. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you good.
Yeah, I agree with what Eric just said, that it seems to be a regional term or a regional reference for fly net, where up here, meaning, New York and Rhode Island and to the north, people talk about these nets as high-rise nets. When you get to New Jersey and south, they're referred to as fly nets. And I don't know that there's a real definition of a fly net compared to a high-rise net, other than the definition and the regulations for this exemption. And, what I've been told by fishermen is that fly nets are called fly nets because the net flies open and up because of the large overhang of the top of the net relative to the foot rope in the sweep. And that a lot of people do consider high-rise nets or rope nets as a type of fly net. And in fact, the rule trawl or the eliminator was developed from a four-seam fly net or high-rise net. So I think probably a better definition, not restricting it to a two-seam net, is probably advantageous. Also, over the years, we've done several different studies using a large mesh belly panel in nets, and that large mesh belly panel is 32-inch mesh. And we've probably done a half a dozen studies. And on all of those studies, that large mesh belly panel releases all different types of flounders, yellowtail flounders, winter flounder, sand dabs, as well as summer flounder. And they usually release at least 50, usually to 75 to 80% of the various flounders that get in the net. So if a fly net has meshes bigger than 32 inches, you're going to release most of the summer flounder that gets in the net anyhow. Thank you.
Thanks, Emerson. Any other thoughts or comments? Questions about the fly net exemption? So I'm hearing a different definition of fly net. Is probably needed to keep the exemption. Anyone else? Hannah, were we ever able to get James? Apparently not. Okay. Any last questions, comments? Anyone on the phone that we're not seeing isn't able to raise your hands? No? All right. Shall we go on, Kylie?
Yeah, I also just sent Fletcher another email with a couple suggestions. Maybe just swing back to him again in a bit after he has a chance to look at that email.
Thanks, Jason. All right, Kylie, go ahead.
Hannah, are you on right now, or Hannah may be talking to James? Okay, well, I'll cover, I can cover the next steps then. So again, we have, in addition to today's public webinar, we have an online comment form. We've received a couple comments there already. It would be great if folks could, particularly if you weren't able to come in on the webinar today, if you're able to either input comments through that form or contact either me or Hannah or Andy to submit your comments or give us a call. We plan to present some of this feedback. Anything received prior to the monitoring committee meeting, which is on November 13th and 14th, would be presented to the monitoring committee. As Andy noted, we are accepting comments on that comment form through November 17th for compilation, and we're going to provide those to the council and to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's board for their meeting December 12th to 14th in Philadelphia. But anything that you would like the monitoring committee to see should be submitted prior to that November 13th to 14th meeting. So the monitoring committee will consider this feedback as well as additional data analysis that we're doing, and they will come up with some recommendations for the council and board to consider in December. At this meeting in December, the council and the board can either make any recommended changes that they may have at that time, or if there's none, they can say recommend no changes. Or there, it may be that for some of these issues, they want to identify further either research priorities or start development of some kind of action if there's a bigger evaluation that's needed, a bigger change needed. So they could identify additional work that needs to be done that they would like to see before making a decision. Minor changes to these regulations can be done through the specifications process, so it's likely that they'll look at any changes again at the August joint meeting next year, but they'll have a couple different pathways for either taking action or identifying additional information needs. So we'll work on kind of laying those out clearly for that group and for the monitoring committee. Bonnie Brady?
Yeah, Kylie, I just want to know, is this webinar being recorded so that you all couldn't leave it somewhere? Sorry, I'm hearing some feedback on myself. For those that were out fishing and unable to either speak at the webinar or access it?
Yes, it is being recorded, and we should be able to share that recording. Yeah, for anyone that needs it.
Will it be online so that people can just click on it, or will it be on the council YouTube channel?
I am not sure. We can talk to Mary about that. I don't think we had decided to post it on the YouTube channel necessarily, but I think we could. So we can. I'll talk to Mary about that.
Yeah, just some way so that guys can get the gist of what's going on so they can comment effectively would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of next steps. Any other comments, questions? Emerson?
Yes, thank you, Kylie. So there were several objectives to us conducting that mesh selectivity study. And that mesh selectivity study looked at summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. And one of the objectives was to see if there might be a common mesh size for scup and black sea bass. And in the report, we draw some conclusions about a possible common mesh size of perhaps 4.5 inch or 5 inch diamond for scup and black sea bass, so that fishermen don't need to have two different nets or two different cod ends for those species. And I know the monitoring committee seems to be focused on the selectivity for summer flounder of the 6 inch square. But I would also suggest that they start to take a look at the possibility of utilizing a common mesh for scup and black sea bass. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Emerson. I think that's we did initially have that on a list of various mesh sizes to reevaluate, and that was considered and discussed by both the monitoring committee and the council and board. And the reason we're focusing on summer flounder mesh issues here is that this seemed to be prioritized by the council and board over exploration of that common mesh size issue. There wasn't ever a huge amount of traction on that in terms of interest in modifying those sizes. I think there was some interest, but a lot of folks were saying that they were already using 5 inch diamond mesh for scup and black sea bass regardless. And we just weren't getting very many comments on it and very much interest. So it kind of has dropped to a lower priority, but it's certainly something that can come back up and be prioritized for further evaluation by the council and board. James Fletcher, I saw your hand up again. You want to give it another shot before we wrap up?
Yeah, and maybe just hold here for a minute while he cycles through a couple of his mic options. Fletcher, there's probably like 2 or 3 mic options under that little caret. my best suggestion at this point is to try to cycle through all those while you're unmuted, and see if one of them will activate.
While we're holding for that, Hannah or Andy, did you have any other additional comments or anything I missed in the wrap up?
No, I would just say what, kind of repeat what I said at the beginning. We'll probably be doing some follow-up with some of you on these comments as we write them up and find that we need some additional information and input and things like that. So you may hear from us again very shortly.
Nothing from me, Kylie. Thanks for covering those slides.
All right, I have not heard anything from James. So clearly having some technical issues there. I think we can follow up with James separately, and I don't think we have anything else for to cover today if there are no more questions or comments. All right, well, thank you everybody for providing your feedback. Please give us a call or submit written comments if you have additional thoughts, and we will write up a summary of this input and all the written comments and provide as much as we can to the monitoring committee, and then we'll provide it all to the council and the board for December. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.